I sat across from someone I love and watched them build a perfect argument for why I deserve less. She almost had me. Part 1. The Gift. My parents are practical people. They grew up without much, built what they have through decades of careful saving and quiet sacrifice, and when they decided to give my sister me something meaningful, they did it the way they do everything, without ceremony, without drama, without even much warning. It was a Sunday in late October. My mom made her chicken and rice. My dad sat at the head of the table the way he always has, and after dinner he slid 2 envelopes across the tablecloth. One to me. One to my sister, Lauren. "We want you both taken care of," he said, "while we're still here to see it." Inside each envelope was the same thing, a letter explaining that they were transferring ownership of the apartment building on Elm Street, a 4-unit property they'd owned since 1998, to the 2 of us equally. 50% to Lauren. 50% to me. The building was currently appraised at $480,000. It generated roughly $5,200 a month in rental income. An attorney had already drawn up the paperwork. I'm Claire. I'm 33. I'm a project coordinator at a mid-size logistics company. I have a studio apartment I rent in the same city, and I have exactly the kind of savings account that makes you feel simultaneously responsible and quietly terrified. I am not wealthy. The prospect of owning half of an income-generating property felt like someone had handed me a life raft I didn't know I'd been waiting for. Lauren is 37. She's a mother. Her son, Dylan, is 8, and she went through a difficult divorce 3 years ago that left her financially strained in ways she doesn't always talk about openly but that have been visible to anyone paying attention. She works in medical billing. She's competent and organized and has always been the one in our family who seems to have a plan, even when the plan isn't working. We hugged our parents. We cried a little. My mom kept saying, "Don't make a big deal," which is her way of making a big deal. My dad looked satisfied in that quiet way of his, like a man who had just checked something important off a list. Lauren and I drove home separately. She texted me that night, "Can we get coffee this week? Want to talk through next steps?" I said yes. I felt good. I felt, for the first time in a long time, like things were going to be okay. I had no idea what was coming. We met at a place called Groundwork on a Wednesday morning. Lauren was already there when I arrived, which is always slightly unnerving because Lauren is never early unless she has something on her mind. She had her laptop open. She had a notepad. She had 2 coffees already ordered. She looked up when I sat down and gave me a warm smile, the kind that reaches her eyes, that makes you feel seen and loved, that has gotten Lauren through more rooms than I can count. My sister is not a cold person. That's what makes everything that followed so complicated to explain. "So," she said, "I've been thinking about the property." "Me too," I said. I looked up the tax implications a little. "I think we need a CPA." "Definitely," she said, nodding. "But before we get to any of that, I wanted to have an honest conversation with you. Just the 2 of us." I wrapped my hands around my coffee cup. "Okay." She took a breath. Not a dramatic breath, a measured one. Lauren doesn't do drama. She does arguments the way an attorney does arguments, and she always has. "I've been thinking about the split," she said. "And I want to be upfront with you because I think you'd rather hear this from me now than have it turn into something weird later." "Sure," I said. "I think a 60-40 split would be more appropriate," she said. "With me holding the 60. The coffee was hot and I was grateful for something to hold. "Okay," I said slowly. "Walk me through your thinking." And she did. She was good at it. She's always been good at it. She explained that she was older, 4 years older, and had taken on more family responsibilities over the years. She had been the one who took Mom to her cardiology appointments for 2 years. She had been the one who dealt with the contractor when the family home needed its roof replaced. She had organized Dad's retirement paperwork. She had shown up more, contributed more, sacrificed more. She also had Dylan to think about. A child whose college future needed planning. A child who deserved stability in a way that my life, single, no kids, flexible, simply didn't require in the same immediate way. "I'm not saying your share isn't important," she said. "Of course it is. But I think if we're being honest with each other, my circumstances warrant a little more. And Mom and Dad, you know how they are. They gave us equal shares because they didn't want anyone to feel bad. But that's not the same as what's actually fair." She said all of this with her eyes steady on mine. No edge in her voice. No aggression. Just a woman having a frank conversation with her sister. And here's the thing. Here's the part one have thought about many times since. She almost got me. I sat there and I felt it. The pull of it. The logic of it, assembled in Lauren's reasonable voice in a warm coffee shop on a Wednesday morning. I thought about her divorce. I thought about Dylan. I thought about the roof, the cardiology appointments, all of it. I almost said okay. Instead I said, let me think about it. She smiled like that was the right answer. She closed her laptop. We talked about other things. I drove home and I sat at my kitchen table and I started doing the math. The building generated $5,200 a month in rental income. A 60-40 split meant Lauren would receive $3,120 per month. I would receive $2,080. That was a difference of $1,040 every single month. Per year, that was $12,480. Over 10 years, that was $124,800, before accounting for appreciation, rent increases, or anything else. I stared at that number for a long time. Then I thought about the things Lauren had said. The cardiology appointments. The roof. The retirement paperwork. I took a notepad and I wrote down every family task I could remember contributing to over the past 10 years. I drove Mom to physical therapy after her knee surgery. I handled the estate attorney when my grandmother passed. I spent 2 weeks at my parents' house when Dad had his gallbladder out. I have sent them money, not large amounts, but real ones, the kind that came from my own tight budget, 3 separate times when something unexpected came up. I thought about the divorce. Lauren's ex-husband, Marcus, had paid child support consistently, as established by the court. Lauren had received the family car, the furniture, and a cash settlement. These were not my business, but they were also context. I thought about Dylan. I love Dylan. Dylan is not a reason to give me $124,800 less than my equal inheritance over the next decade. And then I thought, our parents said 50-50. Not because they didn't want anyone to feel bad. Because they sat down, together, made a deliberate and considered decision, had it drawn up by an attorney, and handed it to us in envelopes. This was not a casual gesture. This was their intention. Lauren had reframed their intention as a well-meaning mistake that she was generously correcting. I sat with that for a few days. And then I called my friend Dana, who is a paralegal and has been my sounding board for every major decision of my adult life. Tell me everything, Dana said. I told her everything. When I was done, Dana was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Claire, she almost got you. I know. You need a real estate attorney. Not a CPA, start with an attorney. I know. And you need to not agree to anything until you understand exactly what equal ownership means and what your rights are. I know. I said I know a lot. What I mean is, I'm learning. Part 2, the education. I found my attorney through a referral from Dana, a woman named Patricia Osei who specialized in real estate and estate law and who had an office that smelled like good coffee and old books. I liked her immediately. I explained the situation. She listened without interrupting, which is a quality I respect enormously in anyone. When I finished, she said, Your parents transferred this property to you and your sister as co-owners, correct? Do you know the form of co-ownership? I didn't. I had to call my dad that evening and ask him to dig out the documents, which he did without asking why. Bless him. The property had been transferred to Lauren and me as tenants in common, with equal shares. Patricia explained what this meant. We each owned 50% of the property. Neither of us could force the other to sell without going through a legal process called a partition action. Neither of us could unilaterally change the terms of our ownership. If we wanted to restructure the ownership percentage, both parties would have to agree in writing, and the agreement would need to meet specific legal requirements. Which means, Patricia said, that if you simply don't agree to a redistribution, the current 50-50 split stands. She seemed so certain I'd agree, I said. People who are good at persuasion often are, Patricia said. She was not unkind about it. Here's what I want you to understand. Your sister has not done anything wrong yet. She made a request. You're entitled to decline it. The question is what happens next and whether you want to be proactive or reactive. That word, proactive, was a turning point for me. I asked Patricia what proactive looked like. She outlined several things, putting a formal co-ownership agreement in place, establishing clear terms for how rental income would be distributed and decisions made, creating a documented record of the property's current state and income. Right now, she said, you and your sister are co-owners with no operating agreement. That's actually a vulnerable position for both of you. If she's smart, she'll want to formalize things too, but the terms of that formalization matter enormously. I hired Patricia. It was $350 for the initial consultation and a retainer after that. I considered it tuition. I did not tell Lauren I had hired an attorney. I did not tell my parents what was happening. I spent 3 weeks quietly learning everything I could about the property. Here is what I learned. The building had 4 units. 2 were rented by long-term tenants, a retired couple named the Garcias in Unit 1, and a single woman named Beth in Unit 3, both of whom had lived there for over 5 years. Unit 2 had a newer tenant who'd been there 18 months. Unit 4 had been vacant for 2 months. The previous tenant had moved out in August, and my parents hadn't gotten around to releasing it. The property management had been handled informally by my dad, who collected rent via check, handled minor repairs himself or through a handyman named Kevin he'd used for 15 years, and kept paper records that he'd been meaning to digitize since approximately 2011. The property taxes were current. The building had no mortgage. My parents had paid it off years ago. There was an insurance policy in place. The rental income was deposited into a joint account my parents held, from which they had been drawing a modest supplemental income. With the transfer, that account and its management would need to be addressed. Patricia helped me understand something important. Because Unit 4 was vacant, the property was currently generating less than its potential income. A properly managed, fully occupied building at current market rates could generate closer to $6,400 a month. The difference, $1,200 a month, was essentially sitting on the table uncollected. Lauren, I noticed, had not mentioned Unit 4 in our coffee conversation. She had quoted the income figure without noting that it was temporarily reduced. I don't know if that was strategic or an oversight. I made a note either way. I responded to Lauren's follow-up text. She'd sent one asking if I'd had more time to think, with a measured message. Yes, still processing everything. Let's plan to meet soon. I want to make sure we set things up right from the beginning. She responded with a heart emoji and a thumbs up. Part 3. The conversation I was ready for. We met again, this time at Lauren's house, 3 weeks after our coffee. Dylan was at a friend's birthday party. Lauren had made tea. It felt like she'd arranged things to feel cozy and domestic, which was a kind thing to do, or possibly a strategic one. I'd stopped being sure which was which. So, she said, settling across from me on her couch. Have you thought more about what I suggested? I have, I said. And I actually want to share where I've landed, and then I want to talk about next steps for the property overall. Lauren's expression was attentive and warm. She had her notepad again. I'm not going to agree to the 60-40 split, I said. I want to be honest with you about that up front, the same way you were honest with me. Something shifted in her face. Not dramatically. Lauren doesn't do dramatic. But something moved behind her eyes. Can I ask why? She said. A few reasons, I said. Mom and Dad made a considered decision. They had an attorney draft the documents. I think it's important that I honor what they intended. I paused. I also did the math. A 60-40 split, sustained over 10 years, means I receive about $124,000 less than my equal share. That's not a small adjustment. That's a significant redistribution of what they gave us. The math doesn't account for contribution, Lauren said. Her voice was still even. Still measured. I thought about that, I said. And I made my own list. I've contributed too, Lauren. Maybe differently, maybe less visibly sometimes, but I have. And honestly, I don't think either of us should be presenting an invoice to the other for the ways we've shown up for our parents. I don't want to do that. She was quiet. What I do want, I said, is to make sure we manage this property well. Together. And I've actually been doing some research on that, because I think there's real money being left on the table right now. I had brought a folder. Inside the folder was a summary Patricia had helped me prepare. Current income, market rate analysis, the cost of a professional property manager, projected income from Unit 4 once leased, 5-year appreciation estimates for the neighborhood. I set it on the coffee table and slid it toward her. Lauren picked it up. She read it. I watched her read it. She is a medical billing specialist. She is not unfamiliar with numbers, with documents, with the experience of having information reframe a situation. Where did you get this? She said. I did some research, I said. I also spoke with a real estate attorney. The room was very quiet. You hired an attorney, Lauren said. I consulted with one, I said. Because I wanted to understand our position and our options before we made any decisions. I think that's reasonable. She set the folder down. She picked up her tea and took a sip and looked out the window for a moment. I recognized this as Lauren thinking, which she often does with her eyes directed somewhere neutral and distant. I wasn't trying to take advantage of you, she said, finally. I know, I said. And I meant it, or at least I chose to believe it, which amounts to the same thing for practical purposes. I think you looked at our circumstances and you made an argument that felt fair to you. I'm not angry. I just can't agree to it. What do you want to do? I want to formalize the co-ownership agreement. Split income 50-50, split decisions and responsibilities equally. I want to hire a property manager so neither of us is managing this informally. And I want to get Unit 4 rented as soon as possible. Another silence. Then Lauren said, a property manager costs money. Typically 8 to 10% of gross rental income, I said. Based on projections, we'd still both net more than we're currently receiving, once the building is fully occupied and managed properly. She looked at the folder again. I need to think, she said. Of course, I said. I stood up, picked up my bag. Take all the time you need. I'll wait to hear from you. I drove home feeling something I hadn't expected. Calm. Not triumphant. Not angry. Just calm, like a woman who had prepared carefully and delivered clearly and now had nothing to do but wait. Update 1. The agreement. Lauren came back to me 10 days later. Not with a counter-argument, with questions. Practical ones, about the property manager, about the co-ownership agreement, about the attorney fees. We had a long phone call. It was almost like the sisters we'd always been, except more careful with each other, more deliberate. There was a formality between us now that hadn't been there before. I didn't know yet whether that would heal or calcify. She agreed to the 50-50 split. She agreed to the property manager. She agreed to have Patricia draft a co-ownership agreement that both of us would sign. I was grateful for Patricia's framing when Lauren later met with her. Patricia treated Lauren respectfully, as a co-owner with equal standing, and made clear that the agreement was designed to protect both of them equally. Lauren had brought her own attorney, a woman from her HR department's referral list, who reviewed the documents without objection. We signed in late January. Each of us received $2,600 a month going forward. The property manager, a firm called Greenfield Property Solutions, took over in February. Within 3 weeks, they had Unit 4 leased to a young professional couple at market rate. The building was fully occupied for the first time in 8 months. Our monthly income, post-management fees, rose to $2,890 each. Update 2. What the math had always said. Spring arrived and the building ran smoothly in ways my father's informal management, through no fault of his own, hadn't quite achieved. Greenfield handled a plumbing issue in Unit 2 that turned out to have been a slow leak for months. They renegotiated the insurance policy and saved us $800 annually. They digitized all the records and gave us access through a shared online portal where Lauren and I could both see every transaction in real time. I checked the portal often in the beginning, then less so as I realized there was nothing to catch. Lauren and I texted occasionally. We had Easter dinner at our parents' house and it was mostly fine. Careful, but fine. My mom, who notices everything, gave me a look at one point that I couldn't entirely read. Later, when we were washing dishes together, she said, "You and Lauren worked things out with the apartment?" "We did," I said. "Good," she said. She handed me a dish to dry. "I wanted it to be equal." "I know, Mom. Your father and I talked about it a lot. We wanted it to be equal." "It is," I said. "It's equal." She nodded, satisfied, and handed me another dish. Update 3. The conversation with Lauren. In May, Lauren called me, not texted, called, and asked if she could come over. I said yes. She sat in my apartment and looked around at it the way she sometimes does, like she's cataloging things, and then she looked at me. "I've been thinking about the fall," she said. "About what I asked you." I waited. "I think I convinced myself it was fair," she said. "I had all these reasons, Dylan, the divorce, the things I'd done for the family, and I stacked them up until they looked like an argument. But I think, if I'm honest..." She trailed off. "I think I was scared. And when I'm scared I make plans." This is one of the truest things my sister has ever said about herself. "I know," I said. "I'm sorry," she said. "Not because the attorney thing was wrong. You were right to protect yourself. I'm sorry I put you in a position where you had to." I thought about what to say for a moment. There were a lot of things I could have said. Some of them were things I'd rehearsed in my head in the months since October, during the worst moments of processing it all, the feeling of having almost been maneuvered, of having almost said yes, of the specific loneliness of not quite being able to trust your own sister. What I said was, "I understand being scared. I've been scared too." She exhaled. It was a shaky exhale. "Dylan's going to be fine," I said. "You're going to be fine. And honestly, the building is doing better now than it was before. We're both making more than the original projections." "I know," she said. "I check the portal." "I know you do. I can see when you log in." She laughed. It was the first genuinely easy laugh between us in months, and it was the best sound I'd heard in a long time. Update 4. 18 months later. It's now October again, a year after the Sunday dinner with the envelopes. The building on Elm Street is doing well. Greenfield raised the rents by 3% across the board in the summer, below market increase, fair to the tenants, and all 4 units renewed their leases. Lauren and I each received $3,040 a month, net of fees and a small reserve fund we agreed to set aside for capital improvements. We're planning to repaint the exterior next spring. Lauren found a contractor. I'm handling the permitting research. It feels, most of the time, like a partnership. Dylan started 3rd grade. He came to visit me last month and we went to the Science Museum and he told me in great detail about tectonic plates, which is apparently his current obsession. He is a wonderful kid. He was always going to be fine. Lauren and I have dinner every few weeks now. We talk about the building but also about other things. Her job, my job, books we're reading, our parents' health. There is still a carefulness between us that wasn't there before, a slight formality, like a fine crack in good pottery that's been repaired. You can see where it happened if you know where to look. But it holds. I think about the version of myself who sat in that coffee shop in October and almost said yes. I think about what that would have looked like, lived forward, the quiet resentment accumulating monthly, the recalibration of what I was worth, the way I would have spent years wondering why I agreed, whether I'd been naive or generous or simply not paying enough attention. I'm glad I did the math. Resolution. What I know now. I've been asked by a few friends, people I told pieces of this story to, whether I think Lauren is a bad person. Whether I think she was deliberately trying to manipulate me. I've thought about it carefully and I'll tell you what I actually believe. I think Lauren is a person who was under financial pressure and emotional strain, who has always been good at making arguments, and who let herself build a case that served her interests while genuinely half believing it was also just. I think she stacked her reasons the way frightened people sometimes do, not from pure cynicism, but from the human capacity to believe what's convenient when we're scared. That doesn't make it okay. What she attempted to do, softly and convincingly, was take $124,000 from me over the course of a decade. Not with force. Not with obvious deception. With a well-constructed argument delivered in a warm voice in a coffee shop. The lesson I carry isn't about my sister, specifically. It's about the difference between persuasiveness and correctness, the way a compelling argument can feel like evidence of truth when it's actually just evidence of skill. Lauren was skilled. The argument felt like truth. The math didn't care how the argument felt. I think about this at work sometimes, in meetings where decisions get made based on who argues most fluently. I've gotten better at pausing and saying let me look at the actual numbers before I respond. It has made me slower to agree and faster to understand, which is a trade I'll take. Patricia, my attorney, sent me a holiday card last December. Inside she wrote, "You handled a difficult situation with clarity and grace. That's rarer than you think." I put it on my refrigerator. I'm not sure why. Something about being told that clarity is rare made me want to remember it. My parents don't know most of this story. They know Lauren and I worked out the details. They know we hired a property manager. My dad seems pleased by the Greenfield reports, which Greenfield sends to all owners and which now include my parents as courtesy recipients. He called me once to say, that Unit 4 situation was really something. Good thinking, getting that sorted. It was a team effort, I said. The building looks good, he said. I drove by last week. It does, I said. You and Mom took good care of it. He was quiet for a moment in that way he has, that economy of emotion quiet. Then he said, we wanted it to be equal. Between you and your sister. It is, Dad, I said. It's exactly equal. And it is. It took work, and an attorney, and a difficult conversation, and months of careful navigation. But it is exactly what my parents intended when they sat at the head of that table and slid 2 identical envelopes across the cloth. Sometimes the most important thing you can do for a gift is protect it. TLDR, parents left my sister and me a rental property equally. Sister asked for 60-40 in her favor with a very convincing argument. I almost agreed. Did the math. Realized it meant $124,000 less for me over 10 years. Consulted a real estate attorney, held the 50-50, formalized everything with a co-ownership agreement and property manager. Building is doing better than ever. Sister apologized. We're okay. Do the math before you agree to anything.